Let's get into Pena Nunes too, Luke. Our friends at Caesars right now have Julianna Pena as a plus 235 underdog. Nunes minus 280. Dude, we have hit these storylines hard, whether it's the pregame preview with Chuck Mindenhall or our loaded Wednesday show. But today's about who wins and why. So, Luke, let's start with this question. Stylistically, technically, we assume this fight's going to be different than the first, which was a chaotic storm. How different, though? What is the keys to victory for Amanda Nunes to turn back the clock, turn back time, and avenge the wrongdoing of what went on in her eyes at UFC 269?
Boy, it's a great question. And the question, of course, is exactly how much of this is doable, how much of this is fixable, right? Because, you know, there could have been underlying issues, as we've discussed ad nauseum to this point, about how those factors could have contributed to the loss in the first one, but some of those could be systemic, some of those could be ingrained, some of those could be irreversible, right? We just don't really know yet. We're going to find out as you're watching this, we're going to find out tomorrow. So what I would say is I went back and I watched the first fight a couple of times, and I think one is she really needs to make sure that I think the leg kicks were a thing for her that were working in the first round that she kind of got away from. Lateral movement, leg kicking, maintaining range at kickboxing range, really just devastating her inside, outside, finding all kinds of ways to slow Julianna Pena down, because if she can't really use that front leg effectively or she's getting swept off of her feet, that's going to be a big deal. I think, two, is avoiding contact, especially in that first round, right? What happened, like, for example, what happened in the first round where she went to the ground? She actually knocked Pena off of her feet with the leg kicks and then elected to get on top. And I think, you know, that by itself wasn't devastating or anything like that, but it didn't really help her. It didn't meaningfully do anything. Like, we often talk about the fact that Amanda Nunes has a good ground game, and that's true in certain respects. Like, on top, she's got devastating ground and pound. On top, she can pass. On top, there's been times where she could, you know, hold position after passing. But these are usually after she's softened somebody up.
Exactly.
Right? It's usually after she's hurt or dropped them in some kind of cases, right? Like the first Duran Demi fight would be a great example of that. At this stage, Pena can be hurt, but dude, she's an active grappler underneath. She uses her butterfly hooks. She is underhooking. She's attempting things. And then in the fight, she was slowing down with that Kimura, which was honestly kind of stalling a little bit. But the point being is she's working in most respects underneath to either to like nullify action or to remove position, to disrupt balance, to disrupt base. That's not someone you just want to go to the ground with if you're Amanda Nunes at this stage of the game. You would really want to avoid that. So I think avoiding kind of contact like that, and I really believe hammering the leg kicks. But I have to tell you, BC, there's just a few more warning signs for Amanda Nunes that give me a little bit of pause. I mean, obviously she has great power. Obviously the wins that she has in her record are, you know, just unbelievable. But the other reality about it all is, man, you know what's one thing that's kind of interesting is she has a long reach and she has a really good timing as well. But she doesn't faint. She doesn't really faint. And there's a lot of ways in which somebody who has a pressure game like Julianna Pena, that's going to be tough to stop if you're not making them reconsider either with feinting and or leg kicks. Leg kicks were there. Those are great. Those are heavy. I think bring those back big time. But honestly, I think she's going to have to get Julianna Pena to slow down a little bit, to worry about what's coming, to not know, to have to rethink things, to disrupt her rhythm. Because if Julianna Pena can just eat a big punch and then establish contact and then force wrestling along the fence line, that's bad news, bro. It's super bad news.
Oh, absolutely. And also anything that leads to a carbon copy of the first fight, which means chaos. If Pena can get Nunes into a state of chaos, we all know now, if we didn't before, I'm not saying Pena's mentally tougher or all this, but she's not going to be afraid to walk through a hell of damage, to have to use her gas tank. She goes on and on. If you really listen to Julianna Pena interviews, she goes on and on that she believes she works harder in the gym than anybody else, and that separates her in these moments. So if you're Nunes, boy, you're going to have to go back to the basics and rely on what we still believe, and I think the odds makers do too, is a gap between them in overall skill. In technical skill when Amanda is applying distance and doing the things that we think she should. Now, Luke, we spent this whole build-up trying to do armchair psychologists in hindsight and figure out what was really wrong with Amanda. I really tried to listen to her words in the last 24 hours. I saw an interview she did with Laura Senko where she said, look, if that last camp was if you want to rate it 1 out of 10, it was a 1 out of 10. I saw her extended breakdown on the UFC Countdown show where she said she suffered a knee injury during training. And Luke, I think it'd be the kind that you'd probably pull out of in the past. But let's not forget, Amanda already had to pull out of a recent fight because of COVID. She had already gotten blasted by Dana when she pulled out of the initial Shevchenko rematch after having that hard weight cut. Maybe she felt the pressure more of I just got to go out there and I'll just figure it out. Well, she met the wrong person at the wrong time. She couldn't figure it out. So if Amanda has no excuses physically, we believe this could be an entirely different fight. The odds makers believe it could be an entirely different fight. Luke, I think even, if you told me that Amanda doesn't spend much time on her back in this rematch, I also think Amanda's going to have a much easier time. The key, obviously, will be some of the things you just mentioned. I don't think she should chase submissions unless she's got a battered, wounded, and ready to go Pena. That's a battle that she's going to lose and lose her stamina in the process. But Luke, she has to establish the threat of her top game, which if you look back over her history, it's threatening. It does damage. That has to be there so Pena can't be comfortable pulling guard or can't be looking at that as an out. And Luke, it's interesting. For all the debate about why the first fight went the way it did, I think we can agree on this principle. It was the worst fight of Amanda Nunes' elite career, and it bumped up against by far the best night of Julianna Pena's elite career. But that was the first fight. Now it's over. How does it change the second fight? And I think when you look at it, Luke, it's like we have to figure out which anomaly in this case is more likely to repeat. Is it more likely that Amanda Nunes, after a 12-fight ridiculous win streak in which she's knocking out and finishing Hall of Famer after Hall of Famer, is it more likely that she can have a flat tire a second time? Or is it more likely that Julianna Pena can put forth the kind of performance that, I'm sorry, if you watched her last 4 fights leading up when she went 2-2 and got stopped twice, you just didn't see it in that, Luke. So what's more likely to happen in this rematch? That Nunes, suffers the continuation of a decline, or that Pena can be that person she was at UFC 269, which was just inspiring. I mean, look, I got goosebumps rewatching that post-fight interview. There was something special that took place that night. But lightning's got to strike twice for it to happen again. It really does, Luke. And that, I know that's looked at as disrespect to Pena. But unless this goes to the deep end of the water, the history, the stats, the video proof, it's all telling you that it's Amanda working behind that jab and slowly breaking Julianna down. And Amanda did admit it on the Countdown show that in round 2 she took way too many strikes that she normally would have dodged or would have stood back from. And Luke, whether it's fatigue, whether it's, oh my God, who is this creature in front of me that won't go away? She bought in on the brawl and it cost her. I can't see us seeing the same exact Amanda physically again. I just can't see that happening, Luke. I believe what she says with the knee injury. I don't think she's making excuses. This is going to be a much, much different fight the second time around. The real question in that, though, is what can Pena do that she hasn't done yet that can win a totally different fight against somebody this great?
I'm not sure I share your analysis.
Bring it, Luke. I'm feeling my BDE in this hat.
The jab with Amanda Nunes, that was what got her in trouble because of the dipping jab of Julianna Pena. She was going right past her, and then that would bring her into position, and then she was getting hit over the top left and right. She had no answer for it. She doesn't feint, Amanda Nunes, really hardly a little bit, but not much. And she didn't have a technical answer for that. Now, obviously, that's something she can work on here, but we'll have to see how she does. But the reality is this. It's like, okay, what's one way she could counteract some of the forward pressure and that aggressiveness that Pena could bring? She could wait till she blitzes, then get underneath, go for a takedown, and potentially do ground and pound. But that's going to involve her taxing a system. You could say, well, what about just clinching? But if she clinches and does anything other than dirty boxing, which she could do, I mean, that actually would be something pretty interesting to see her try, because I think she could probably do it pretty well. But if she knees at all, some of those might get caught, and she risks getting pushed off balance, and then you have a grappling affair there. It's not that I don't think Amanda Nunes can grapple very well. I think she probably is as good as Pena, potentially even a little bit better. But that's not the question about who's technically better. The question is who has a more aggressive capacity for volume action in that kind of ground attack. And the answer there is Julianna Pena by a mile. It's not really so clear to me that Amanda Nunes can, like, avoid the ground altogether, but like inviting that seems kind of suspect. I mean, it's not like you can't point to things that are wrong in Julianna Pena's game, including in ways in which she won the first fight. But I'm just here to tell you, I'm a little skeptical about Amanda Nunes' chances here. Now, I want to be very, very clear. I don't have a fucking clue what's going to happen in this fight. It is very possible that Amanda Nunes could go in there, have a good answer for the jabs and the style of jabs that Julianna Pena was throwing, is back to the leg kick, she's push kicking, and she just takes her head off. Like, would that really be surprising? Not necessarily. But if it is true that Pena can take Amanda Nunes' best shot, like we'll see, but if it is true, and if it is true that her aggression and work rate is just a bad matchup for someone like Amanda Nunes, you know, you can say, again, someone might have someone else's number and not actually be better than them in totality. Someone might have someone else's number and not have the same kind of career that they had overall. Okay. I'm willing to believe, BC. I'm willing to believe many of the things that went wrong the first time won't be here the second time. I do think this will be a different fight. I do think it potentially will either go very short or very long. I don't think it'll be that 2-round space like it was the last time. But I also think that a lot of people are surfing reputationally off who Amanda Nunes is and not really looking at how these two actually match up and why Pena's win was not at all an accident.